Masters of martial arts. They exist, though they are unknown to society. There are people who excel in martial arts. They use force to maintain order throughout South Korea. And I'm one of them. In the sales area of a grocery store, a gray-haired man. With his hand in the air, he completed his narrative, causing embarrassment to the cashier across the counter. Well, what was that nonsense? The boy looked at his old grandfather in utter bewilderment. His evening was clearly not going well. That same day, 12 hours ago, the first afternoon classes were just finishing up at the old Chonha school. While the students were still sitting at their desks, there were two guys standing in a small nook near the main building of the school. While one of them was standing with his hands in his pockets, the other was making some incomprehensible movements with his hands in the air. Turning his palms out, the kid in the gray shirt was goofing around, constantly talking in an idiotic voice about some divine teachings. "Hyukchan sect!" the hooligan shouted, and then struck a third boy who was in the alley at the time. The impact was so strong that the schoolboy flew a couple of meters away. The debauchee elicited laughter from his partner, who asked why he didn't just beat the money out of the victim. The bully replied to his accomplice that if he also watched Hyukchan Divine Fist, he would probably become a fan too. Suddenly, the dialogue between the two friends was interrupted by a third voice. A boy lying on the ground said that he was also watching this popular TV series. This 18-year-old high school student's name was Kang haejin. After getting down on one knee, he told the offenders that Hyukchan's Divine Fist had an interesting plot, but he missed most of it because of a lack of money. Clenching his fists, he muttered that this show exaggerated everything compared to real fights, and it was unlikely that anyone would be able to replicate that in real life. After a moment, Haejin lunged at one of the attackers. In his head, he visualized one of the moves he had been shown in his MMA class and shouted to the bully that he didn't stand a chance against real fighting moves. "What the hell are you talking about?" the guy in the shirt asked, and had no problem fending off the boy's counterattack by punching him in the face with his fist. By inertia, the schoolboy's body flew off again, but this time even farther away. The boy looked angrily at his bully, who mocked him. The bully ironically asked him where he got his strength and courage from. Moving closer to the victim, the vile type looked at the boy with disdain. Shrouded in rage, he began mercilessly pounding the schoolboy, shouting that he was just a poor orphan who should behave properly. "If you keep acting like this, I'm going to beat you even harder!" shouted the bully, delivering merciless blows to the boy. Suddenly, someone from behind called out to the troublemaker. He turned around, looking for the source of the sound. A girl stood a little higher, not far from the stairs opposite. Looking into the bully's eyes, she ordered him to stop immediately. It was Woo Ah-han. She looked attractive, with a short haircut and eyes the color of the ocean abyss, and she looked sternly at the types who were beating up the schoolboy. Calling the girl names, the bully demanded that she go her own way if she didn't want to get into trouble. His partner blocked his friend's way, trying to stop him, but then a tall guy appeared behind Ahan's back. As he walked, he called out to the troublemakers, asking what they had just said. This young man turned out to be Wang Tessin. He looked around at the bullies, reminding them that he had already warned them not to bully children. "Would you rather I play with you then, or would you rather run away from here?" the boy asked, and looked angrily at the rascal in the gray shirt. The two hooligans, apologizing hurriedly, retreated from the alley. Tessin ran up to Ahan, asking if she was hurt. The girl said she didn't need any help. Walking over to Haejin, who was sitting on the ground, the peer helped him up and advised him to forget and not think about those guys. Akan, who had stepped aside, suddenly asked the beaten guy why he was messing with those hooligans. Receiving no response, the girl looked back and glared at Haejin, saying that in that case it was better to let herself be beaten than to try to interfere. At the end, Ahan added that sometimes it was better to give up. Lastly, she told Haejin that if he didn't like what she just said, he could continue to be a punching bag. Taesan hurried after the departing girl, suggesting that they go together. The boy continued to sit on the ground. Tessin's attempts to ask Ahan to meet him after school were heard from around the corner. Out of confusion and resentment, Haejin slapped his fist on his knee. He struggled to get to his feet and was surprised at the arrogance of his classmates. He didn't have any money, so why should he bow to some jerks? Clenching his fist, Hagen mouthed that he already had to plow through his part-time job, and all of the money he had set aside went to MMA training. "I'll practice and I can beat those assholes," said the boy, raising his eyes. A few hours later, in the training room, Haejin heard terrible news from the coach. He suggested that the boy stop training for a while. The boy said that he would definitely pay for the lessons later. The trainer explained that after 6 months of lessons, hygiene was progressing well, and money had nothing to do with it. Look at your body. Usually it starts to grow after about 6 months, the mentor said, looking at the boy's puny body. The trainer stood up and said that Hagen's body hadn't changed at all since the first class, and this was the first time he was facing something like this. Shrugging his shoulders, the jock replied that it was as if the kid's body didn't want to change. Patting the boy on the shoulder, the mentor said that further continuation of training seemed to him a waste of time, so he would return the boy's payment for the lessons. The boy tried to change the coach's mind, saying he would try even harder, but it was all in vain. Hygiene! It seems there are endeavors in this world that don't pay off, the mentor said sharply, much to the boy's dismay. Late evening descended on the streets of the South Korean city. The convenience store was preparing for the night shift. Hyjin squatted between the rows of food. As he pondered the coach's words, he decided that the teacher was the first to give up, and it was all about persistence. The guy thought that he could study at home on his own because he had already mastered the program and he could save money. As he pondered the decision, the boy realized that if he worked out between part-time jobs, he could pick up another extra shift. Looking around and picking up a box of refrigerated food as a weight, the guy started doing squats. However, as soon as he sat down for the fourth time, a sharp pain pierced his entire body. The sensation was so intense that his eyes went black. Coughing and dropping the crate of groceries on the floor, the guy fell to his knees. It wasn't the first time he had this pain, but lately it had been coming more frequently. Holding back his tears, Hyjin thought he should take some vitamins right away. At that moment, there was a shout behind the boy's back. Someone was threatening someone loudly. Soon a second voice was heard, apologizing to the first. Haejin looked around to see what was going on. He saw 3 men standing outside the store window. One of them, a big man in a shirt, was holding an old man by the arm and shouting that the homeless man had stolen something from him. The gray-haired man explained that he hadn't stolen anything from anyone. "Just get on with it and get on with it!" shouted the type watching from the sidelines. A moment later, a bulky man in a white shirt punched the old man in the face. Tossing the bum aside, he said he just needed to vent the anger he had built up during the day on someone. Turning to his accomplice, the big man asked his friend if he should beat the old man further. The gray-haired man sat on his knees and begged for mercy. But suddenly, Hyjin ran out into the street with a cell phone near his ear. He loudly reported the information that 2 guys were beating up an old man outside a store in Habuk branch. The boy mouthed into the phone for the police to come quickly. After looking at the boy, the hooligans decided to run away immediately. As he ran away, the big man in the white shirt pointed his finger at Hagen and shouted that he remembered him, and they would meet again. After muttering that such assholes always pick on the weak, the boy walked over to the old man and asked if he was okay. The man asked if the boy had really called the police. Pointing to his phone, Hyjin said he was just pretending and didn't want to call, so he wouldn't get in too much trouble later. The boy came to the old man and helped him to his feet. The stranger thanked the boy, saying that very few people were willing to help strangers nowadays. The kid nodded, saying that he still couldn't stand people like those 2 bastards. The old man was leaning very heavily on one of his legs. The boy decided that those hooligans had deliberately kicked the man's legs, thinking that he was an easy target. The stranger looked into the boy's eyes and suddenly asked him who his parents were. Thus, the story reached the point where it all began. The man stood with his hand raised after dumping a bunch of strange information on Haejin. Looking at the old man, the boy thought that this type first asked him about his parents, and then suddenly started talking nonsense. Hyjin decided to play along with the stranger. He asked why such an amazing man was walking the streets in rags. The old man replied that he was on the run. From what he said, there were various martial arts factions in the past. But nowadays, there are only 3 of them left in South Korea. The royal company uses martial arts for aggression and control of the underworld. A new religious group called Shinshin Religion that believes in God and follows him as their leader, and an unofficial government organization commonly referred to as the Emperor. They oversee and control martial arts affairs. The old man lowered his eyes and uttered that without any warning, the 3 factions had joined together to suppress the smaller alliances. Continuing to tell the story, he said that the faction he was a member of had also merged into a separate alliance. Almost immediately, however, their association was caught in a cycle of endless battles and intrigue. Betrayals, the deaths of their closest friends, and then the agony that overtook their faction. Like many other unions, they were unable to do anything about the sheer power of the three organizations. The old man himself barely survived and hid from persecution for more than a decade. Looking at the kid across from him, he explained that because of everything that had happened to him, he had been wary when the boy had mentioned the police, as it might have attracted the attention of those three factions. "Ah, that's it!" Looking away from the old man, Haejin said. At that moment, he still thought that the strange stranger was just immersed in his imaginary world. As he continued to play along, the boy asked if it was right to tell someone like him. But the old man interrupted him, reminding him that he still hadn't answered his question about his family. The stranger asked the question about the boy's parents again. He didn't look crazy now. The boy replied that he knew nothing about his parents, as they had died when he was still young. The boy irritatedly asked why the stranger was asking him about his relatives. At the same time, a jade-colored shroud enveloped the gray-haired man's eyes. Suddenly, he reached out to Hagen and touched 2 fingers to the hero's chest. The boy watched the old man in a stupor. He took his hand away and said that the boy's meridians were blocked. When Haejin asked what meridians were, the stranger said that they were the pathways through which ki energy flowed in the human body. The stranger said that a normal person had several meridians open, but the boy's meridians were blocked. The boy asked in bewilderment how the chi energy was related to what the man had said earlier. The stranger didn't answer the question, saying something about 6 months. At Hagen's questioning look, he replied that he was aware of the fact that even though the boy was studying hard, his body wasn't changing at all. Continuing, the stranger muttered that the body should grow when ki energy is flowing, but with the blocked meridians, Haejin would not be able to grow, and vice versa, putting the body under unnecessary stress. The boy's mind flashed back to a recent bout of pain. The old man said even the smallest exercise would cause him unbearable pain. And if he continued to torture his body like this, the ki energy would soon flow backwards, leading to death. Looking into the boy's eyes, the stranger said he could guess the situation the boy was in. But is this situation more important than life? At the end, the gray-haired man offered the child 2 options: either give up or find another way. After all, there are efforts in this world that are better not to resort to. Haejin was surprised. For the second time in a day, he heard the same thing from different people. Thinking back on everything that had happened to him recently, the boy realized that he wasn't a born fighter, and it would be easier to give up than to suffer like this. Suddenly, the guy slammed his hand on the table and looked at the old man. "But I didn't get a proper family education, so I didn't learn to give up in time," Haejin muttered angrily. The boy said that he would definitely become stronger and crush all his enemies. And since he had made this decision, no one had any right to stop him. The stranger stood, eyes downcast, and scrutinized the dirty hand of the young cashier. "I'm going to follow this path anyway, so either help me or just forget about it," Haejin finished, keeping his gaze on the old man. The gray-haired man had not moved once during the boy's monologue. All this time he'd been staring at the guy's unwashed palm like that. A thought flashed through Hagen's mind that he was arguing with some bum. Gathering his thoughts, he said that the old man could call and summon an ambulance. But the stranger suddenly took the guy's hand. "Well, it looks like there's no other way out," the weirdo said in response to Hagen's pleas to let go of his hand. With a rebuke, the unknown man said that he had already seen such people who are willing to torture themselves endlessly. Such people go on and on until their bodies are destroyed. The old man muttered that he didn't like the whole thing, but if he left it as it was, the kid would continue to abuse himself until he died. Looking Haejin in the eye, the stranger said that he would now open his meridians. In response to the boy's cries, the gray-haired man sternly ordered him to stand still. Looking menacingly at the kid, the old man added that he should in no way make any noise. After a moment, they exchanged handshakes. Then, the stranger bowed his head over the table. Haejin still stood motionless, trying not to make a sound. After a couple seconds, the old man leaned on his cane and complained that he hadn't used ki energy in a very long time. Then he headed for the supermarket exit. Before the door, the stranger said that the boy would have to feel much better now. Feeling nothing but disappointment, the kid remained standing like that until the old man disappeared into the depths of the dark alleys. After a few long hours, the guy's shift at the convenience store came to an end. Hagen staggered through the nooks and crannies. He thought that the world he lived in was huge, and there were so many fucked up people in it. Ki meridians, it's like something out of a martial arts manhwa. I'm living in the 21st century. What a load of crap, thought the boy. He was trying to figure out how everything had come to be the way his life had turned out. But in the next instant, a man's hand blocked his path. Haejin realized that he was once again in trouble. Now you just wait a little while, kid. It'll all be over soon. I told you we'd meet again, didn't I? Said a rough male voice. It was the two hooligans who had beaten up the old man not long ago. The big man in the blue business suit, smiling, approached his partner and asked cheerfully what was wrong. Grabbing Hagen by the neck, the guy in the gray shirt laughed and said that he was obviously a nerd, even though he was trying to fight back. The boy listened as the bully asked him if he was tired of living a righteous life. The vile type said that they realized right away that the police call was fake and that he liked to rip off defenseless people like Hagen. But a moment later, the boy caught the bulky man's finger with his free hand and snapped it. The bully instantly knelt down and grabbed his hand. The index finger of his right hand throbbed violently with growing pain. Meanwhile, Haejin was surprised that the bastard was only complaining about a broken finger. The guy noted that it was incredibly fun to watch the two assholes run away. The big man in the gray shirt, shouting obscene words at Hagen, rushed to attack the boy. The guy, calming himself down, decided to concentrate on the actions and movements of the thug. The hero decided to choose the tactic of fighting on the counterattack. When the bully approaches and almost hits him, the guy will have to dodge and immediately hit back. After waiting for a moment, Haejin swung to strike his opponent directly in the face. However, as soon as he wanted to launch his attack, something happened that he had never felt in his past fights. It was as if time around him had practically stopped. He felt completely free to act. It seemed to him that the opponent opposite him simply stood still. At the same instant, small pulses ran down his arm like a chain. It was probably the QE energy running along the meridians. His arm was covered in several small bursts of energy, which felt like it lightened his arm considerably and sped up the impact. At that moment, the boy realized that this would be the first fight of his life that he would finally win. The thugs, who had never seen anything like this before, recoiled in horror at the unknown phenomenon. But there was no avoiding the hit. The explosive force hit the bully in front of him. The force of the impulse was so great that the guy behind him was also thrown back by the blast wave. The blaze from this attack was so strong that it could be seen from across the block. When the dust cloud cleared, Hagen saw two hooligans lying at the other end of the alley without any sign of life. Both of them had torn pieces of clothing from the force of the explosion. The boy stood like a stumbling block. His face expressed denial of what had happened. The sleeve of his right arm was torn to the shoulder. "So are you feeling better now?" came an unexpected voice from behind me. To Hagen's great horror, the same old man was standing behind him. Panicking, the boy tried to turn around, but realized he couldn't. The mysterious stranger asked the kid if he liked the power, and if he now believed in chi and the existence of martial arts. As soon as he said that, the same jade-colored energy aura immediately began to form around the old man's feet again. "You're still inexperienced, though." "Well, it's only natural," the madman said, turning around and looking toward the end of the alley. Haejin was uneasy about the smoke enveloping the weirdo. He was also startled that the old man's nearly broken leg was now unharmed. Suddenly, the gray-haired man grinned and said that he must be behaving indecently, since he still hadn't introduced himself. "I am Park Jong-un, the leader of the Beggars' Union," the old man said solemnly. But to most, he is better known as the General. Trying to stop the pathos pouring from the old man's mouth, Haejin called out to the man. Jong-un turned around and looked at the boy. The boy was still standing in the same pose in which he had knocked out the bullies. He said he couldn't move his body. Blue energy was still oozing from his hands. The general walked leisurely over to the boy, and in one fell swoop hoisted his body onto his shoulder. "You're tired from releasing too much ki energy," the old man muttered. Glancing over his shoulder, he added that it would be best for Haejin to rest now, to gather his strength and not worry too much about everything that had happened. Moving in the direction of the alley exit, Jang-un asked the boy where he lived to help him get home. This question made the boy a little wary. He replied evasively that he lived alone and had nothing to steal. The general was irritated by this formulation. The next moment, Haejin felt a sharp, intense pain in the area below his lower back. He shouted at the courtyard in surprise. It turned out that the old man had pressed him on an acupuncture point. The boy's body was having a hard time tolerating any physical impact due to the high energy release. Listening to the boy's pleas for forgiveness, the general thought, replaying the situation with the fight in his head again. It had only been a few hours since he had opened the boy's meridians, yet they were already so strong. This child had much more potential than Park Jong-un could have expected. At dawn, a bunch of people crowded around the very alley where the fight between the hooligans and Haejin had taken place the previous night. Many in the crowd compared the two motionless bodies to sacred paintings, as both men had their arms crossed on their stomachs. "God, that's disgusting!" shouted some girl. Many people filmed what happened on their phones. Woo Ah-han was among those who happened to see the bodies of the two drunks. She asked her friend, who was holding her hand, if she had seen enough and if they could leave. Ah-han's gaze was fixed on the men lying there. Something, though, was causing some wariness and suspicion. Although there were no cuts, wounds, or bruises on their bodies, their shirts were torn as if they had been in the center of an explosion. Their empty eyes were wide open. Glancing to the end of the alleyway, Ah-han thought that surely these two must have been dragged away from the depths of the nook by someone so they could be easily detected. Before the girl could think about it, a measured, loud stomping sounded behind her. An unpleasant chill ran down the schoolgirl's back. She felt the presence of someone dangerous and powerful behind her. A man with an unusual hair color and wearing dark sunglasses pushed through the crowd and made his way closer to the epicenter of the event. Ah-han noticed that this strange man was much taller than any man she had ever met. The black business suit complemented the austere image of a serious and determined man. Staring at the back of the stranger's head, the girl speculated as to why he might be so interested in two drunks lying in strange poses in an early morning alleyway. The mysterious man stood in front of the bodies and studied them intently without making a sound. Ah-han looked around when she sensed something wrong. Her senses didn't fail her this time. The guy with the glasses wasn't alone. Around the crowd, as if at the snap of a finger, several similarly unusual people in business suits appeared at once. Some of them were hurriedly talking on the phone. Others were standing with their backs to the scene, as if waiting for someone or guarding something. "Ah-han, what are you thinking about again?" interrupted the silence of the schoolgirl's friend. The girl, keeping her eyes on the strange people, replied that nothing terrible had happened, and she was thinking about today's test work. Realizing that Ah-han had some strange thoughts again, her friend suggested that she go to school, to which the girl agreed. Meanwhile, Haejin had a terrible dream. He dreamt of the night before. The events that had happened were succeeding each other. The boy was exactly reliving all his actions all over again. At some point, he was almost convinced that the whole situation was not real and that it was just another delirious dream on the background of fatigue. At that moment, however, he dreamed of the general. In the same instant, Haejin woke up in a cold sweat, screaming that he remembered everything. The boy saw his humble apartment. There was no one around but him. Getting out of bed, the boy thought that he and the old man must have come home together. Surprised that he was alone in the room, Haejin decided that the general had just carried him home and left. Thinking that he would still have something to ask the older man, the boy tried to get to his feet. But immediately his eyes darkened sharply. Unable to stay on his feet, the boy fell to his knees, groaning in pain. But even so, the body refused to obey. As his head fell to the floor, Haejin realized that his spine had also become very weak. The boy realized that every effort he made was difficult. It felt as if his heart might explode at any moment. Leaning on one arm and taking his chest with the other, Haejin looked around himself. At that moment, his consciousness left his body for a while. For a moment, it seemed to him that he was flying in infinite space, and his body was as light as a feather. At the same time, his eyes were presented with an incomprehensible bluish mist flying before his eyes. After a couple more seconds, consciousness returned to him, and Haejin opened his eyes, seeing the ceiling of his apartment again. Still in a semi-delirious state, the boy thought he was lying on a soft pillow and didn't understand why his body hurt so much. However, having fallen into darkness again, Haejin woke up in the position in which he had passed out. The boy touched his chest, which was incredibly well pumped, to see if he was dreaming. The boy jumped to his feet and was horrified to find that his body had changed dramatically overnight. Raising his right arm, Haejin didn't recognize it. The perfect shape was accompanied by powerful veins from wrist to elbow. Falling to his knees under the weight of his new body, the boy thought that after all, it wasn't the most important thing right now. Suddenly, an incomprehensible haze began to ooze from his right ear. This blue substance was like the energy that helped his punch during the fight become many times stronger. "It's called ki," said a familiar voice from the direction of the front door. Clamping his ears tightly with fear, Haejin raised his head. There was a general standing near the entrance. He ordered the boy to stop making noise so as not to attract unnecessary attention. He waved his cane and told the boy to sit down so that he could finally explain everything. Jongan's face was not as kind as it had been the night before. On the contrary, he looked like a mentor, and his eyes looked sternly at the boy. Jumping up from the floor, Haejin ran up to the old man in a rage and irritably asked the gray-haired man if this was all his doing. Jangan said in amazement that he had no idea what could have happened or how the guy could have grown so much in one night. Asking the young man to turn around, the general put his hand on his back. The old man stated that the schoolboy's blood circulation was normal and there was nothing to worry about. Again, trying to get some answer from Jangun, Haejin asked again what the old man had done to him last night. He replied that he himself had just returned and had not seen the boy since he had personally brought him home in his arms. Then how is that possible? The boy asked grudgingly. As soon as he tensed up, energy began to pour out of his ears with renewed vigor. The old man looked at this transformation with incomprehension. He had never encountered anything like it, so there could be only one explanation. Because the guy's meridians were blocked, the body did not change over time. Now the guides for Qui energy were opened, and muscle changes began. As for the appearance, the reason for the dramatic muscle growth was not because the meridians had become open. The thing was that the boy trained himself, despite the complete lack of results. Therefore, it could be said that Haejin achieved the body transformation by himself. You really worked hard, the old man finished. At this thought, even more ki energy began to be released from the guy's ears. The general suddenly realized that the boy had grown about 20 centimeters overnight, which he was unsurprised by. Jongan said that after he carried the boy to the apartment, he went to clean up his tracks. In doing so, the general reminded him to use martial arts as carefully as possible. If you leave too bright a trail, the faction's bloodhounds will attack, and then it will be a matter of time before Hagen is caught by the king, god, or emperor. Jangan looked into the boy's eyes and told him that he should not show his body to other people for a while. When Haejin asked why this was so, the general replied that until the guy learned to control ki energy, he would leave his footprints everywhere. Tired of the blue smoke oozing through his ears, the boy slammed them down, wondering if they couldn't just be plugged in with some headphones. But as soon as he covered his ears, chi began to ooze out through his nostrils. The guy tried to plug his nose as well, but the energy was already coming out from somewhere in his pants. Looking at this spectacle, Jonggong asked Haejin not to panic, for he would help him master full control over his ki. That's right! I, General, will take care of your training myself! The old man turned his back to the boy and said. Without stopping trying to stop the ki from entering his body, Haejin suddenly asked the gray-haired man why he called himself a general. When he received silence instead of an answer, he said that he was old enough to be told about gods, emperors, kings, and generals. Jongan said that he would tell him all about it now. The case took place in Seoul in the year 1962 on the outskirts of a poor suburb. On that day, Beggars Union leader Kim Ju-ban, after checking in with everyone gathered, said that the world is going through a major change involving many people and circumstances. Their faction, in order to adapt to the new reality, needed to keep up and be reborn into the new culture. And that required a lot of changes. On that day, the current General Park Jang-gun was only 8 years old, but he was already listening attentively to the words of the Union leader. And the first innovation Kim Ju-ban decided to implement was changing the title Leader to General. The solemnity with which the leader presented this not the most significant news at first threw the followers into a kind of stupor. However, after a few seconds, everyone as one in voice shouted that this news is great, and the faction welcomes their general to the new title. There is a very deep meaning behind it, not a leader but a general. Kim Jaboon admired himself. However, no one could know that the faction leader had simply read epic poetry about war, and there was no meaning behind the new title. The Hwasan clan were the first of the Union's partners to recognize the beggars. The faction delegate reported to the clan leader that the new title would be used in all official documents from now on, and the general requested that it be included in all treaties. The head of the family turned to one of his subordinates and asked how the word Hwasan was translated into English. After a bit of thought, the employee carrying the pile of papers replied that it translates to volcano in English. Then call your chief Vulcan from today! Shouted the chief angrily. And so on down the line. The next group to use a new title for their leader was the Mudon clan. Their leader now called himself Shaman. Trailing behind, the head of the Haenum clan called himself Ocean. Thus, more and more factions changed the titles of their leaders to their English counterparts. That's how the unspoken tradition came to be, finished the general. Haejin smirked and said that this was all quite unusual and even strange. The boy was still sitting on the floor, trying to control the key crawling out of every crevice. After getting up from the floor, Jangun advised the boy to move more slowly and not to rush into anything. The old man's words terrified Haejin. He remembered that he had to go to school right away. Barely having time to ask what time it was, the guy received a powerful blow to the jaw, after which he passed out and did not regain consciousness for a long time. He woke up after a while. The key energy was still flowing through the cracks, but the air in the room was more humid. The boy looked around the unfamiliar dark room, which looked like a corridor with red lamps hanging from the ceiling. It was quite cool in this place. The last thing Haejin remembered was the moment the old man stabbed him in the chest with 2 fingers. Suddenly, someone appeared in front of the boy, greatly frightening the schoolboy. Standing half in the dark, the stranger ordered the boy to get up, since he was already awake. This place is one of the Beggars' Union's secret hideouts. No one knows of its existence. You will be safe here, uttered the mysterious stranger, still without lighting up his face. Trying to discern who was talking to him, Haejin heard someone say that he had promised to help completely take control of key energy in the morning. The general stepped out of the shadows. He had changed into neat clothes and held a bamboo staff in his right hand. As he approached, the old man said that he would help the boy until he learned how to hide his key perfectly. But Jangun had set a serious condition. If Haejin failed to master his internal energy, he would stay in this dungeon forever. This uncompromising condition gave the kid a shock. The only thing he thought about was whether this was his reward for perfect school attendance. 2 days later, Seoul continues to live its usual measured life. Ah yes, Thane is the best. Tan is just beautiful, the blue-haired girl muttered. It was lunchtime, and the pretty girl in the business suit was munching on a delicious macaroni. She explained to her partner that finding a martial artist without evidence or clues was not an easy task. She explained to her partner that finding a martial artist without evidence or clues was a challenge. The girl noted that as soon as their acquaintance Namgung was in such a situation, he immediately started giving out similar tasks. She complained that she missed the old days. Her partner replied that those days were gone and they would have to accept the harsh reality. The picture of the 2 murdered hooligans popped into the mind of the female agent. She asked her colleague what he thought about the death sentence for those 2 guys. After all, when you think about it, it was very much like a martial arts defeat. The type with the phone still calmly replied that it was unlikely that the wizards were involved, as no traces of energy were found at the site. Saying that he had finally cleaned up, the fellow agent stood up. The girl asked him if there was no evidence left at the crime scene at all. The type in the business suit replied that among those martial artists who had survived to this day, there were hardly any who would use their key so recklessly. And that's certainly not the way inexperienced guys would do it, because then they'd be easily caught. Leaning back and looking up at the sky, she wondered where the damn old man general was hiding after all. Did he go to heaven or has he gone underground? The beauty asked herself. None of them knew that an unknown aura had been watching them from the ventilation shaft for several minutes already. Blue haze flew down the narrow corridors, snaking through the basements toward the sewers. Turning in the direction of the hanging red lights, Aura was approaching the main target. Upon reaching the gray-haired old man standing at his back, the haze stopped and lingered in place. Fully unleash your aura. Crossing his arms over his chest, the general ordered. In the next instant, the energy streams fused together, and Haejin appeared against Jangun, standing with his arms spread out. This test was one of the most difficult, and that's why sweat began to flow from the guy at the end of the transformation. Looking contentedly at his disciple, the general ordered the student to try to fully release his ki. The boy raised his hands, and streams of energy rushed in different directions with great speed, fluttering Jangun's gray hair. Admiringly, the old man examined his subordinate, hardly believing that he had managed to realize such potential in such a short period of time. The energy streams, rapidly spreading through the air, reached the red lamps on the ceiling. In addition to splitting his own body, Haejin also learned how to control the waves of his ki. Clenching his left fist, he took control of the energy flow and amplified it. The new outburst caused some of the bulbs to burst. After assessing the result of the work he had done, the general called the boy over and told him that he apparently had nothing more to teach him in terms of controlling his ki. Without turning around, haejin asked if he could finally walk. However, immediately, without waiting for his mentor's reply, the guy turned around and shouted that this was all some kind of madness. "Why did you keep me in the sewers for 2 whole months?" yelled the boy. His memory flashed back to his 9-hour herbalism class, where he'd immediately get hit with a stick for improper body positioning. The next unpleasant memory was of meditating among hundreds of cockroaches and rats and then eating them. Falling to his knees, haejin began beating his hands on the floor and shouting that he had almost been recognized as the store's employee of the month, and now, because of the long absence, he might be fired altogether. After all, a sick leave only lasts a week, not 2 months. Clutching his hands to his head and clutching his hair, he almost cried, thinking about how he would live without any paycheck. Meanwhile, the general quietly came up behind him. Taking the boy by the shoulder, he looked him in the eye. Haejin thought for a moment that Jong-gun was about to give him another piece of advice. Immediately, however, the old man squeezed the boy by the area between his neck and shoulder so hard that the boy twisted in pain. The general asked the boy how dare he speak so insolently to his mentor. In the next instant, he pressed another spot, which made haejin scream even harder. Looking at the screaming kid, the old man couldn't understand anything. It had always been thought that it took at least a year to train an ordinary ki control, and 5 years if one had no talent at all. Even though it's the basics of martial arts, it doesn't mean it's easy. But this kid had mastered the basics of the drill in just 2 months, and such a development scared Jong-gun. Meanwhile, haejin had already gotten used to the pain of the grip. After a couple minutes, the boy stood up and rubbed his neck and said that he had to go to school right away, or he could be in serious trouble. The general asked the boy why he was going to school. Is it to catch up with the curriculum, or is there some other reason? Haejin tried to lie, saying that he had to go to university after school, so he had to try hard. But the old man understood and threw himself at the boy from behind. Grabbing his student's head with his hand, the teacher shouted for him not to dare lie to him anymore. Desperately yelling, haejin begged to just let him rest for a while. Immediately letting the kid go and grinning, Jong-gun said that he wasn't going to stop him since the kid wouldn't listen to him anyway. The general warned that haejin should never dare to use his powers in public, but to which the boy replied that he remembered everything. Immediately, the schoolboy stood up and asked his mentor not to worry, because he wouldn't need strength to beat up those guys. On the same day, further action developed again near Chonha High School. In the same alley where Hagen had been beaten not long ago, the sounds of fighting could be heard again. "Hyukchan clan!" the bully shouted, and threw the lowly boy to the other end of the alley with a powerful right punch. The big man's partner stood aside with his cell phone and asked when he would get bored with the show. An excited guy in a white shirt asked a boy lying on the ground when he would give him his wallet. After getting the wallet, the scoundrel began to extract money from it, saying that it used to be fun to beat up that kid, to which his accomplice agreed. Taking out the bills, the partners were discussing who they would beat up next time, when suddenly they were shouted at from the direction of the stairs. Turning around, the bullies saw a man wearing a hooded sweatshirt. Haejin stood in front of them with a band-aid glued to his face. Looking down at the bastards, he asked if they were tired of doing the same thing after 2 months. Both villains recognized the boy. Grinning, they noted that he had grown a little in that short time. "Anyway, welcome back. As a welcome back, we're going to kick your ass," muttered the guy in the white shirt. But he didn't have time to say anything else. After a moment, haejin lightning ran a few meters to the bully and swung a powerful blow to his head. The scoundrel's face instantly turned into a bloody mess. His eyes blurred, and he lost consciousness. The attack was so coordinated at one point that the villain's body didn't go anywhere. On the contrary, he immediately fell without making a sound. Haejin exhaled after the punch and stopped. After his grueling training with the general, a single blow was no problem for him. Raising his head, he looked at the bully's partner. Smirking at his opponent's helplessness, the hooded guy said that he had just shown how to use the Hyukchan clan's technique. Looking at the type, he said that in real life there is little practical use for the kicking techniques performed in the TV series. After all, when he tried it out, he realized that there were too many unnecessary actions in the movements from the movies. The other bully watched the tall guy in horror and didn't understand what had happened to him or how he had changed so drastically. Looking at the bulky man with a pile of muscles ready to kill him, the rogue couldn't believe that the man in front of him was the same Kang Haejin. "Are you going to start it yourself, or shall I start it first?" the hooded big man asked hatefully, But that bully answered nothing and continued to stand still without a word. Realizing that he could act freely from here on, haejin cartoonishly made motions like the Hyukchon Clan TV series. Completing the combination, he was already anticipating a long-awaited victory over his offenders. The bastard, who was on his feet, began to scream and apologize. But the choice had already been made. Haejin swung his left arm and punched his opponent in the stomach with a swing, knocking him back against the wall. The bully, who had fallen to the ground, was still conscious for some time. Tears were streaming from his eyes. After a couple of moments, however, he did pass out. The wallet, which they had taken from the boy who had been lying on the ground the whole time, slipped out of his hands after the blow. Noting that this was easier than he had anticipated, Haejin squatted down. Picking up the purse from the ground, he said that these bastards were still getting themselves at those that looked weaker than them. Standing up to his full height, the guy tossed his wallet to the schoolboy. Looking at the boy calmly, Haejin said that he could go and not worry. And it would be good if he didn't tell the teachers about what had happened here. The child, thanking his rescuer, ran away from the scene, leaving the guy in the hoodie alone with the bodies of the hooligans. After standing and thinking, Haejin realized that he had accomplished his main goal. He had caught the offenders. What to do next he couldn't think of. After examining the unconscious hooligans, he realized that he might have overdone it and beaten them too badly. In any case, it was not a good idea to just leave them here now. So, he would have to hide them somewhere. What's this all about? A woman's voice behind him interrupted his musings. Hagen turned toward the stairs in horror. Wu Ahan stood to the other side, with a disgruntled expression on her face as always, and her hands in her jacket pockets. Looking sternly at the boy, the girl wondered what had happened here again. At the same time, it was the height of the day in Seoul. Small clouds floated over the houses where interesting things were happening. Ugh, it feels good to get outside. The fresh air is just beautiful, General Park Jong-un exclaimed, walking along the roof with his pole. He was imitating the daily exercise that almost any Korean retiree does. However, his mind was on Kang Haejin. If he thought rationally, the general should have stopped the kid, even if he had to knock him out to do it. The old man remembered the face of his young apprentice. It was undoubtedly the most talented master he had ever known. If it were that simple, I wouldn't be able to survive, the general said, looking up at the clouds passing by. Contemplating the celestial blue, he realized that there was nothing he could do except that this boy was still his disciple. The old man thought that he would have to help Haejin anyway. Suddenly, the door opened behind him. Suddenly, the agents of the leading factions came out onto the roof, discussing that the general had indeed fled abroad, and their search for him in South Korea was futile. But then, they noticed a gray-haired man standing with his back to them. Long time no see, Namgung's youngsters, the green-jacketed man said, turning to the people who had entered the rooftop. Instantly, the group recognized the old man as General Park Jong-gwang. Everyone in the squad was confused for a moment, none of them realizing how this was possible. The head of the group ordered to prepare for the attack, to which the old man laughed, saying that the boys were making a hasty fuss. In the same instant, he surveyed his potential opponents rather calmly and ominously. A moment later, a huge pillar of light pierced the clear daytime sky, and the surroundings became dark for a while. The general radiated incredible energy, literally blowing his opponents off their feet. The squad leader glared angrily at Jangan, but he couldn't move from the airflow created by the energy blast. Feeling total superiority and looking arrogantly at his opponents, the general suddenly asked if these people were getting along well with the king. The old man stood in front of the squad, surrounded by an energy vortex. Smirking, he asked with a sneer, "Is it so honorable to grovel before the king?" The general's words caused the leader of the group to become inordinately furious. The reinforcements that came running to help also didn't expect to see the legendary Park Jangan on that rooftop. Ironically, the old man said that now there were more people and the show could begin. At the same second, the squad leader rushed out of his seat to attack. With his katana out of its sheath, he intended the speed of his attacks to decide the outcome of the battle. Spreading out, the blue-haired thug jumped, and using the Heavenly Sword technique, activated the Heaven Strike ability, which dealt several dozen blows to the general. However, the result of the attack made the usually calm group leader stunned by what he saw. With his pole, the old man fended off all his blows and remained completely unharmed. Mocking his rival, Jangan noted that Namgung's faction had become even stronger during this time. Unable to handle the emotional pressure, the squad leader shouted that he was requesting support from headquarters. The girl agent stopped the leader, ordering the member standing next to her to call for backup. Pulling out his phone, the type in the business suit shouted to the others to pounce on the old man together. But no sooner had he said it than a powerful blow from the pole struck him in the palm of his hand. Pressing his opponent's hand into his own chest, the general managed to smash the phone in this way as well. Soaring gracefully above his opponent, Jangan muttered that it wouldn't work that way. Such a lightning-fast, barely visible to the eye dash from one end of the roof to the other amazed everyone in the squad. Tucking his staff into the chest of a fallen, unconscious member of the group, the general stood looking at the girl agent who had lost her balance. After a couple of seconds, the old man found himself completely surrounded with men with swords drawn. Looking around at the thugs gathered around him, Jangan said that he was nowhere near as young as he had been in his best years. But if the fighting continued, the consequences for the squad would be disastrous. Nevertheless, the group's leaders remained determined to finally solve the long-standing problem. In that case, you all have to take the old man into consideration. Please be gentle, Jangan said calmly, unwinding his staff. The squad members pounced on the general from different directions in an instant, hoping to finally deal with him once and for all. The old man concentrated the energy in his staff. The power of his ki was so unimaginable that the staff began to bend under the pressure of the powerful pulses. The general swung the pole and slammed it into the floor, causing a titanic release of energy. An explosion of colossal power shook the buildings within a few blocks, and a greenish flash appeared above the roof of the house where the battle was taking place. And at the same moment, in the courtyard of Chonhawu Ahan High School, Haejin sternly asked what had happened here. Trying not to reveal his physical changes, the boy crouched down and, making a fool of himself, thought how best he could escape from here. The girl's gaze was both stern and at the same time incredibly suspicious. The boy's gaze was pulled as far away as possible and looked for ways to escape in every possible way. The tense silence was broken by Wang Tessin, who approached. Calling out to Wu Ahan, the boy happily rushed over to reprimand the school's troublemakers once again. Peeking around the corner, he found the girl standing and looking at a type in a hoodie sitting on his lap. Moving closer, Wang Tessin recognized the seated boy as Kang haejin. Yo, long time no see, guys. The last 2 whole months, huh? The schoolboy said, nervous and pulling his hoodie tighter and tighter over his face. Wang Tai-sang replied that he remembered that Haejin had been sick for 2 months. Wu Ahan added that on top of that, he had changed a lot in such a short period of time. The boy laughed, muttering that maybe he really had changed a bit. Trying to make an excuse, he said that he had recently changed gyms, and his body was finally starting to show progress after hard workouts. Really? Wu Ahan asked without a shred of confidence. Trying his best not to reveal his true size, Haejin confirmed that he had told the purest truth. Suddenly, he jumped up and quickly ran around the corner, shouting that he had forgotten to talk to the teacher, and after that he could talk to the boys. After following the fleeing idiot with a glance, Wang Tessin said that the world really knows how to surprise. Wu Ahan, on the other hand, didn't say a word. She looked around at the unconscious school children lying on the ground. It was strange that this was the second similar beating of hooligans in 2 months in the same neighborhood. But the most unusual thing in this story was that in the first case, the fight took place right before Hagen's mysterious illness, and in the second, right after his unexpected transformation and recovery. All these facts were beginning to worry Wu Ahan greatly. After reaching the teacher's lounge, Haejin found his supervisor. After discussing his imaginary illness with him, he got permission to return to school. Ordering the student to go to class and try not to miss class again, the teacher let Haejin go. Walking down the hallway, the boy thought it was very good that his class teacher was busy and didn't even look up at him. Looking at his hand, the lad thought it was best to do as the general told him, which was to be as careful as possible and not show his strength. He remembered what his mentor had told him about the leading factions. They had deployed surveillance networks to hunt down martial artists, and if they saw Park Jongguang using his abilities, he would surely be killed by now. That's why even after completing the training, you can't use your ki or attract unnecessary attention with your own, got it? The general said that night. But then Haejin realized that there was the biggest problem. He had grown a lot in 2 months, and it was impossible to hide that growth. Pulling his hood up, he decided that probably the best course of action would be to try to blend in with the crowd as much as possible. He managed to get into the class without any problems. His first lesson in 6 months was Korean language. Tensely sitting on the back of his desk, he didn't realize if his plan was working or not. On the other hand, if no one has asked him about anything, Then either the plan is working well or no one just doesn't care about him. Wang Tessin was asleep on the desk and paid no attention to Haejin. But at the same time, Wuhan practically kept her eyes on the kid. Her ever-suspicious gaze followed the boy throughout the lesson. And it didn't seem like she was going to tell anyone about the changes that had happened to him. However, she looked at Haejin as if she originally knew everything and about everything. "What are you always looking at? Shit, study up!" the guy shouted, swinging his fists. But as is often the case in such situations, it was all just thoughts. But he had won her over, at least in his expression. Lying on his arms and looking sadly at the desk, Haejin wondered if he just stayed here, would everything somehow work out? When all classes were over, the hallways were filled with dozens of students rushing about on various personal errands. A little cautiously, the hero looked out of the office and surveyed the aisles. There probably wouldn't be anything else going on today. Han watched him for a while, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. Heading towards the mirror, Haejin decided it was time for him to think about interviewing for a new part-time job, since he'd been out of work for 2 months now and had almost no money left. Looking at his reflection, the guy joked that with this appearance he could already count on a position in the service industry. "Get that band-aid off your face." A calm female voice came from behind me. Seeing Han behind him, Haejin recoiled and asked what she was doing here. The girl replied that she had some advice. After touching up her lips, she turned to the guy and said she didn't want to go into details about what had happened to him these past 2 months. Looking into Haejin's eyes, the girl mouthed that right now he'd better lay low for a while, as he was in far more danger than he could ever imagine. Her gaze was serious and ominous. Before the hero could ask a question, the girl was called out by some guy, asking if she was going with him soon. Han turned around and headed towards the screaming schoolboy. Haejin was left standing in bewilderment. What kind of danger was he suddenly in? Suddenly, someone called out to him from behind. He turned around and saw a tall, tattooed man kneading his jaw. The bully asked the hero if he wanted to go home right after beating up his friends. Haejin realized the danger Han was talking about. The big man offered the boy a choice. Either he would cooperate, or he would be finished. The boy chose the second option without a second thought, but immediately he looked angrily at the big man and said he was giving them an hour. Such insolence pissed off the tall type. Walking a short distance beyond the school grounds, Hagen and his assailants ran into a crowd of aggressive boys. They instantly surrounded the boy on all sides and glanced nervously at him in anticipation of a fight. Someone shouted that the boy would not be coming home today. With a mocking look around at the gathered types, Haejin was surprised to see all the bullies of the school gathered in one place, and the kind of attention that even made him feel uncomfortable. The big guy with the bat told the kid to stop thinking he was tough because he'd only beaten 2 people. The short guy supported his partner, saying that those guys were no match for him. At the same second, the short man received a hard blow to the chest, causing blood to spurt from his nose. Haejin, getting into a fighting stance, decided not to throw around words and get straight to the point. Counting about 20 men in the grouping, the boy said he thought they were all equally weak. As he prepared to reflect the blows, he thought that if he used his inner strength, surely this fight could turn into a beating. While everyone was busy squabbling, there was someone watching the situation at the end of the tunnel. The dark silhouette occasionally turned its head, looking around at the gathered people. After a while, Haejin was the only one still standing. Bending over and breathing heavily, he realized that not even an hour had passed. Bleeding sweat, the boy realized that he was trying so hard not to spew out key energy that it was getting harder to move by the minute. Taking a hand to his stomach, he felt the energy ready to burst out. The boy took a moment to realize that he had to be very careful. Haejin heaved himself to his feet heavily. At the same moment, a tall, dark silhouette appeared behind him. Feeling a chill run down his back, the boy turned around, but at the same moment, the unknown man threw himself at him. Haejin didn't have time to react to the sudden attack. The stranger's blow hit the kid's left cheek. The fight-weary boy couldn't contain the key energy this time, and it began to ooze out of his ear. Someone slammed Hagen's head into the ground in an attempt to knock him out, but the schoolboy remained conscious. Then the stranger lifted the boy up by his hair. At that moment, Haejin realized that his classmate was standing in front of him. Wang Tesong's face suddenly distorted with fear and hatred. Holding the boy by his hair, he scrutinized the key energy flowing out of his ears. "We should have given them a taste just in case. I had a hunch," Tesson said. Suddenly, the space around him was flooded with red energy. Calling Haejin a loser, he angrily asked where the boy had trained in martial arts. Meanwhile, a merciless brawl continued on the roof of the building. The general looked at the defeated opponents. As he lowered his pole, he noticed that old age had caught up with him, and he was getting tired much faster. Looking at those who were still able to stand on their feet, he wondered why they weren't finally done with all of this. Among those who had not yet been defeated were the head of the squad and his deputy. They looked at the old man standing across from them. It seemed that he was still fresh and full of vigor. It was truly incredible. The leader of the group asked Jang-gun what his motive was and why he had let himself be exposed so suddenly. In response, the old man asked them a question. As if he were a coach rather than a nemesis, he asked why there was so much doubt in their swords. Scratching his beard, the general mused that if they really wanted to kill him, he wouldn't be able to escape without a scratch. Continuing, he said that their abilities were therefore so meaningless. Jang-gun asked if Namgung's little ones were really not beating at full strength just because he had asked for it. The old man waited, staring intently at his attackers. Without receiving a reply, the general said that in order to survive in the world of martial arts, one must behave appropriately. And if you hesitate, none of the opponents can do anything. With this seemingly mocking speech, he infuriated the squad leader. His deputy jumped up and shouted for Jang-gun to stop such talk as he had no right to say such things. Listening to the girl's death threats, the old man sighed and said that he had really overdone it. Lowering his head, he muttered that he had to go. Looking sadly at his feet, the general added that if fate willed it, they would meet again. In the same second, the old man wrapped around himself several times, creating a powerful airflow. As it unfolded, it suddenly disappeared. Staring at the empty space in front of her, the girl agent didn't understand how the general was able to vanish into thin air in an instant. Looking at the leader, the deputy asked if he was okay. The squad leader did not answer the question. Looking away, he only thoughtfully picked up his sword from the ground. Jang-gun, meanwhile, was making rapid progress across the city's rooftops. As it turned out, all this fighting was for the sake of all factions being distracted by the general's appearance, so that in case of unforeseen circumstances, they wouldn't notice Hagen's possible joints. Lightning fast and covering the distance, the old man hoped that his disciple wouldn't attract too much attention. Meanwhile, Tessin continued to hold his victim by the hair and asked where he learned martial arts. Trying to remedy the situation, Haejin pretended that he had no idea what his classmate was asking him. Not believing it, Tessin decided to get the truth the hard way. He swung his fist and said that he would have to make the boy talk. "Don't break!" shouted the red-haired type and punched the kid in the chest with all his might. Unexpectedly, Haejin didn't fall flat. On the contrary, he grouped himself in mid-air and stood still with his feet slipping through the air. The boy rubbed his hair with resentment as he looked at his opponent. An energy cloud began to form around him. Finally convinced that he was right, Tessin told the kid that he would have to avoid it now, even if he wanted to tear his hair out. The classmate's hands poured red energy. Getting up from his knees, he mockingly said that it looked like Haejin was feigning ignorance since he knew how to control his ki. At that moment, the boy's fears were confirmed. Revealing himself, Tessin let slip that his father actually has one specific business. Solemnly raising his head, he pronounced that he was the heir to the royal company. Within his faction, however, he is known by the alias Prince. Shoving his hands in his pockets, Tessin noted that it was still pretty amazing that Haejin had managed to learn some techniques somewhere in just a few months. The prince offered to tell the boy where the remnants of the annoying sects that taught the boy all this were. If he cooperated, Tessin promised to pardon his classmate. Without a drop of fear in his eyes, Haejin asked what would happen if he refused to answer. Expecting such an outcome, the prince said that in that case the boy would be beaten and humiliated. At the same instant, Tessin lunged at the guy, preparing an energy attack with his right hand. Haejin put his hands out in front of his face, expecting to block a blow to the head. Prince hit the block put up by the boy and nearly hit him in the face. The blow was so strong that Hagen's hands could barely withstand the hit. Tessin shouted that the kid only knew how to release his energy mindlessly. With those words, he once again swung around to attack. The schoolboy blocked his classmate's punch again. But this time, it was even harder. The prince shouted furiously that he shouldn't have beaten those kids with martial arts. Looking at the boy madly, Tessin asked if he really thought he was going to be on top in school. Striking blow after blow, the red-haired type added that now Haejin was back to being as pathetic as before. The prince continued to threaten that he would kill both the boy and the man who taught him. Through the shouts and blows, the kid noticed that Tessin was preparing something. Changing his footing, the prince began to turn his hull around, preparing for another attack. Abruptly straightening his right leg, He slammed it into Haejin's arms with all his might, knocking the guy back. The knockdown boy flew a few meters away. Adjusting his school uniform, Tessin looked at his rising classmate and asked why he had started learning martial arts. As he buttoned his button, he added that if the boy had kept his head down, everything would have been fine. The prince added that Haejin would have been beaten up quite a bit in such a case, and he would have saved the boy in front of Wu Ahan. At that moment, a rather nasty puzzle suddenly formed in the hero's mind. The boy asked what Tessin had said about Ahan. He laughed and said that the bullies who were always beating up Haejin weren't acting in his best interest. Embarrassed, Prince added that the boy should blame Wu Ahan for everything, since guys have to try hard to look good in front of girls. The guy was on all fours and couldn't believe what he was hearing. It turns out that all this time, the one who was constantly rescuing him was also the perpetrator of all these beatings. Right. I was just toying with you, Tessin muttered arrogantly. Getting into a fighting stance, the prince prepared to finish off his classmate. Spewing ki from his hands, he said that now it was finally time to end it all. But unexpectedly, several dozen small stones flew from Haejin's side. Tammin glanced questioningly at his opponent. It turned out that the boy was not going to give up, but instead was heavy on his feet. Saying he was very nervous at first and didn't know what to do, the kid tried to steady himself on weakened legs. In the next instant, blue ki enveloped his fists. Standing up, he added that he had now decided that he needed to study as much as possible, and he would think about the rest later. "What are you talking about, degenerate?" the prince shouted back in anger and bewilderment. Haejin responded by calling Tessin an idiot, saying that there were no girls these days who could enjoy such methods of showing attention. "All you know how to do is talk. You're a piece of shit, not a prince," the boy finished, causing his opponent to hate him immensely. In the very next second, Tessin was already throwing himself at his enemy, delivering blow after blow. However, this time, Haejin endured these attacks much more resiliently, not flying aside after each push. The prince, though, was still enthusiastic and had no doubts about victory. As he continued to beat the boy, he shouted that he couldn't succeed by blindly copying something. But then, suddenly, Tessin was thrown off the guy by a small shockwave after another blow. Puzzled, trying not to reduce the intensity of his attacks, the prince tried to understand why he was thrown away from his opponent. The defensive Haejin muttered that thanks to his classmate, he had learned something useful after all. If you add density to the dough while kneading it, it will become stronger. Looking spitefully at his opponent, the boy wondered if he really thought he was really that good with his abilities. Tessin looked at Haejin with hatred. "That look, don't look at me like that," shouted the prince and kicked his foot on the ground, raising a cloud of dust into the air. His fists suddenly increased in size, becoming red-hot from the concentration of energy in them. Continuing to titillate Tessin's ego, Haejin ironically asked what kind of absolute movement it was. Tired of figuring out what to say next, the boy shouted to his opponent to just attack already. In the same instant, the prince snapped out of his seat, crumbling the asphalt beneath him in the process. He was rapidly approaching Hagen. On the run, Tessin activated his Light of the King ability, preparing to make the first attack with his right hand. Realizing that he needed to be as careful as possible right now, Haejin grouped himself together in anticipation of an attack. Both guys prepared for mutual attacks. Running up to Haejin, Tessin landed a crushing blow on the boy. He responded with an energy counterattack of his own, throwing his right arm forward. Incredible strength accumulated at the point of contact between the two fists. In order not to fall, Haejin stomped his foot with all his might. The prince realized that his opponent, like himself, was trying at the breaking point of his powers. At this moment, the boy's leg began to exude a faintly visible blue energy. Now he was ready to turn the outcome of the battle in his favor. Haejin began to press and overpower his opponent, causing Tessin to become seriously agitated. The boy's mind was spinning that the big man was incomparable to the general. At that moment, the prince's anxiety gradually turned to fear of defeat. Haejin noticed this. Satisfied, he shouted that now it was his turn to win. But then, unexpectedly, a third player appeared on the battlefield. Declaring behind Hagen's back, he quickly slapped the guy on the back. This attack was so unexpected that the boy, exhausted by the incessant fighting, momentarily lost control of the battle. What was more unusual was that after being hit by the stranger, the guy started to lose consciousness. "I'm sorry, but I think we'll call it a day," the unfamiliar man with the sword said, before Haejin finally slipped into darkness. Looking at the unexpected outcome of the fight and rubbing his right arm, Tessin glared at the unexpected guest. Glancing over at the tall guy in the business suit, the prince asked what this guy was doing here. "Long time no see, young master," said the man with pink hair with a smile on his face. Looking over the fallen boy, the man told Tessin that his father had called an emergency meeting today, as the general had suddenly appeared in town. Looking at the prince's displeased face, the suit-clad man added that he had gone for a walk and felt some energy, so he had come here. And as it turned out, not for nothing. Dropping his hands into his pockets, he mouthed that Tessin now owed him, something the schoolboy himself was clearly not happy about. The enraged prince shouted that he would have won anyway, even if no one was around. At the end, he called the guy in the suit all sorts of names, saying he was fed up with him. Tessin's fierce gaze angrily scrutinized the perfectly calm face of the uninvited guest. Breaking the silence, the man with pink hair ironically apologized to the young master, asking him to forgive him with his generous heart. He then walked over to Haejin lying on the ground and hefted him onto his shoulder, with the words that he would have to take him with him. "The meeting turned out to be a lot more fun than I anticipated," he finished, slipping his free hand into his pocket. Immediately, he moved toward the tunnel exit. There, behind the nearest tree, some girl was standing there, eavesdropping. It was the curious Wu Ahan. She was shocked by what she saw, but there was nothing she could do. The afternoon at the royal company's main headquarters in Junwon City was not an ordinary workday. Two exhausted agents were walking down the corridor. The girl, bowing her head, mouthed that she didn't want to go there and offered to say that she felt sick and wanted to go to the bathroom. The squad leader replied seriously that it was pointless to run away, and although he realized that his partner was uncomfortable with it, he just had to be patient for a while. Walking between the two security guards, the blue-haired agents stopped near a massive double door. The bodyguards ordered those who had come to introduce themselves. Namgung Jinjun, the 6th chief of the 7 departments, and Namgung Jina, the 7th chief, stood in front of them. After confirming the identities, one of the guards said the president was already expecting guests and opened the doors to the office. 5 people sat in the conference room, weary with waiting. One of them sat alone on a wide bench. This is what the top management of the royal company looked like. This particular branch was called the 7 departments. One of the chiefs broke the silence, saying that she had heard that the general had not left a chance to Jinjun and Gina's squad. This girl was the 2nd chief of the 7 departments, Godarin, nicknamed Big. Across from her sat 3rd chief An Kyong-soo, known as Glasses amongst his own. Next to him, laughing at his colleague's failure, sat the 4th chief of departments, Do Hyun Bae, nicknamed Tank. Next to Big sat a guy in a hat and dark glasses. It was the 5th chief, Jumashan, nicknamed Shyster. Annoyed, Gina asked Godarin what would have been different if she had fought. Big replied with a smile that she would have performed clearly better than Namgung's siblings. Bursting into laughter, the 2nd chief asked her colleague if she really wanted to push through. Gina grabbed her sword with her hand, muttering that she would cut her rival to pieces. At the same moment, her brother told her to stop and calm down. Suddenly, the person sitting apart from everyone ordered everyone to stop writhing immediately. This 7th person was the president of the royal company, Wan Chul-woo, better known as King. Rubbing his hands together, he asked everyone to be more restrained, because he hadn't called everyone to find out about the relationship. Feeling the power and authority of the leader, all the chiefs instantly fell silent. After looking around at his subordinates, Chul-woo thanked everyone for their quick response to his request. Believing the reason for the conflict between the chiefs, the king decided to explain that the general is very strong, and no one blames Namgung's siblings for losing. Accordingly, they have no cause for self-injury. Jinjun bowed and thanked the president for those words. Mashan asked a fair question. Why did Park Jangguang show up so suddenly after being carefully hidden all these long years? Hyun Bae, who was sitting across from him, jokingly asked Shustak if he was afraid. Hyun Bae jokingly asked him if he was afraid. The king asked Jinjung if there was anything unusual about that havoc. Confidently, the 6th chief replied that, in his personal experience, the general was purposely diverting attention away from something. When asked by Big what he could prove it with, the blue-haired lad replied that the old man had plenty of time to escape. Thinking back on what had happened, Jinjun added that most likely, if the general had wanted it, everyone who was there would have been long dead. However, he hadn't killed anyone, only wounded a couple of people. It felt like he wanted to get our attention but didn't want to make a big deal out of it. That's what it felt like to me, summarized the 6th chief. Placing his hands on his knees, the king told Jinjun that his opinion was quite weighty. Restless Big said that even if you embellish it, it turns out that Namgung's siblings owe their lives to the enemy, which is a shame considering their family's martial arts background. Stopping his sister, the 6th chief confirmed that they were the ones who had nothing to say to that. Taking a glance at his older brother, Godarin remarked that he was very boring. An Kyung-soo said that if Jinjun's hypothesis was correct, then despite the risk from appearing in public, something happened that the general strongly wanted to hide. With a glance at the siblings, Ochki added that, in that case, only one thought occurred to him. At the same moment, the front door swung open, and a guy with pink hair and some boy on his shoulder entered the conference room. Pointing to the boy he was holding, the man in the business suit said that it looked like he was the general's apprentice. "Sorry, President, I'm a little late," uttered the first chief of the 7 departments, Jian Inhuan, better known as Inhuman. Jinjun scrutinized the unconscious, unfamiliar kid hanging there. Big asked Brutal what he had forgotten at the meeting if he said it was always boring. Laughing, the first chief replied that she had too bad an opinion of him, and he only missed meetings for good reasons. Dismissing the boy, he added that when he comes to a meeting, he always tries his best. Turning to the king, Inhuan said that it seemed that this schoolboy was a friend of the prince. He was pretty good in the fight, and so Cruel decided to intervene. However, if he didn't, Wang Tesan would have won anyway. The president looked with interest at the lad who had unexpectedly imposed competition on his excellent son. With a smile, Inhuan compared the sudden appearance of the general, who had been hiding for years, and the new, rather strong martial arts-skilled boy. Putting his foot down on the kid, he looked around the hall. With a glance at the king, Cruel added that, though he wasn't sure, they would find out everything when they questioned this schoolboy. That night, in one of the city's older residential neighborhoods, a light suddenly came on in the window of a brick house. An empty, open suitcase stood in the center of the room. A woman's school jacket was lying next to it. The yellow name tag said, "U Ahan." The girl stood not far from the window and braided her hair into a ponytail. She was wearing a black top and black pants. She pulled up her belt and checked to make sure it was properly secured. She then secured behind her back a shiny sword with an eagle drawn at the hilt. So, Wu Han prepared herself for the challenging night ahead. Climbing out the window, she began to make lightning-fast leaps between the walls of the houses to her target. Upon reaching the spot, the girl moved down the wall. The thought that she had to hurry was in her head. Almost getting there, Ahan jumped down and landed in a narrow alleyway. Immediately, she ran forward to the green door to the semi-basement. The girl thought this was the house where someone had found Hagen, and surely there must be a clue to his origin here. Grasping the doorknob, she hoped she would be able to contact her classmate's mentor today. However, the door wouldn't open. Suddenly, a heavy staff flew from behind, right next to Akan's head. It rattled against the door. Looking around, the girl saw a man who said she couldn't just break into someone else's house. A slight chill ran through the girl's entire body. The general was standing right in front of her. The old man looked at her and noted that he was very familiar with her outfit. With a stern look at the beauty, Jangan advised her to think hard before answering the question of who she was. Ignoring the general's demand, the girl asked him to lower the staff as she was in a great hurry. Glaring angrily at the stranger, the old man repeated his question. Ahan replied that she understood that this form was familiar to him, and she was willing to answer anything. Reaching for the sword behind her back, the girl said her name was Wu Ahan. Showing the eagle emblem on her blade, she said that they had the same goal. Looking into the old man's eyes, the girl said that she was His Majesty's daughter. To the general's clarifying question as to whether Ahan was really his daughter, the girl replied that Jangan must remember her father. With pain in his voice, the old man replied that he could never forget him. Memories immediately surfaced in the man's mind. That was the leader of the pure current sect, Wu Yum, nicknamed His Majesty. He was one of the strongest martial artists the general had ever seen, even among those who fought against the emperor. He was strong, wise, and energetic, and also to those who made Jangan feel good by their presence. However, like many faction leaders, Yum once fell into a trap and died. Looking at the saddened Ahan, the general said that he did not know that His Majesty had a daughter. If he were alive, he would be the same age as the old man now. Still looking with great distrust at the girl, the general said he had many questions, but would only ask one for now. Making a menacing expression on his face, the old man asked what happened to Haejin. Hanging the sword behind her back, Ahan realized that this stranger was her classmate's teacher. She looked the general in the eye and said that she didn't believe in coincidences, but in this situation it was really tempting. With a slight twitch, the girl said that Janggong's disciple was in very great danger right now. Meanwhile, in one of the torture chambers, blood from the blows was splattering the ceiling and walls. Haejin, bound in many chains, had been beaten mercilessly on every organ and part of his body. His face was red with bruises. Kneading his arm after the blows, the first chief said that was enough for warming up for now. Adjusting his glove and examining his captive, Inhuan wondered if the kid was going to talk at all. Showing Jangen's photo once again, Cruel asked where this homeless old man was now, and if he was really the boy's mentor. Haejin glared at his executioner in exasperation, but as usual he didn't utter a word. On the contrary, he gathered all the ki and enveloped himself in an energy cloud, trying to break the chains. However, the shackles began to get very hot at any contact with energy, which cut off any hope of getting out of here by force. Glancing at the chains, it seemed to Haejin for a moment that they were even drawing out his chi. Taking the boy by the hair, the cruel one said that if he told him everything he knew, he would be released. Inhuan could even talk to the boss, who would find him a job. In response to the suggestion, the lad spat in the torturer's face. However, the latter managed to cover himself in time from the spit with the general's picture. With hatred, the first chief said he had it all figured out. However, instead of the expected torture, Inhuan turned around and threw the photo of Jangen, saying that the man must have big balls to dare to do such a thing. As he approached one of the tables, Cruel turned around and thanked the guy for not revealing his true identity so quickly. On this table were several screwdrivers, scalpels, a hammer, wire cutters, and many other implements. Realizing what awaited him this time, Haejin decided that it was entirely his fault. Looking at the photo that had fallen nearby, he thought that his teacher had repeatedly warned him to be careful, and he had given in to his emotions, and this was what it had led to. Through tears, the boy told Cruel to do whatever he wanted to him. Looking at the torturer, the boy added that he didn't know anything anyway. But in his head, he had already decided that if he was wrong, he would at least take full responsibility in an adult way. Examining the scalpel in his hand, the first chief chuckled, saying that everyone says that at first. "So let's start with your toenails," he said, turning to face his victim. Meanwhile, Glasses was standing at the king's reception in the conference room. Reviewing the documents, the president asked how the operation was progressing. The third chief replied that the reconnaissance team had begun the mission. There was only a little time to wait to get the information. Looking at the report, the king said it was a clue to the whereabouts of the general who showed up after so long. Rereading what he had written, he added that they were bound to find the old man no matter what. Suddenly, his hands began to exude red energy. The yellow bracelets on his wrists shook frantically. Soon, the entire space around him became filled with his red ki. Clutching the papers in his hands, the director solemnly shouted that if the general was in their hands, the royal company would be at the top of the martial arts world, even surpassing the emperor. Looking at the third chief, Chol-woo said that this information should not be known to the other factions. He then asked if a cover could be organized, to which Ochki replied that there was no problem, at least for a while. It was already night outside, but there were still lights burning in the windows of the Royal Corporation. Sleepy, tired guards stood near the main entrance. Suddenly, a woman in shoes and a dress appeared on the small platform near the entrance. Along with her walked an unusual man in black shoes. The guards warned the strangers not to come close to the building and asked who they were. A second guard stated that you can't just walk into this building. The woman in evening dress suddenly ordered the bodyguards away. Immediately afterward, their bodies felt as if they had been pierced by a blade. Unable to move, the type in the suit watched the intruders. The next moment, their bodies obeyed the stranger's demand wordlessly and stepped aside, allowing the couple into the room. There were still two bodyguards in suits standing in front of the royal company's CEO's office. They heard static on the radio and tried to interrogate their partners in the other rooms about what was going on. While the guard was trying to figure out what was going on the floors, two strangers entered the hallway. Hearing footsteps in the distance, the suit-clad man turned around and couldn't believe his eyes. "Gosh, they're good. I don't think there are enough words," said an unknown girl in an evening gown. "Well, what can you do?" replied her partner, wearing glasses and a business suit. The couple began to approach the entrance to the conference room with a steady stride. The security guards announced an emergency. One of them said that it was urgent to report to the CEO. As soon as he said that, the stranger in the suit began to emit ki energy from his hands. The effect worked like time dilation. So the intruder calmly approached the guards closely. Standing beside them, the unknown man held out his glowing hands to the bodyguards. At the same instant, the glow of his hands intensified several times. A few seconds later, the time dilation effect passed. It was followed by a tremendous explosion that blew out the doors to the office, throwing the guards after them. The surprised eyeglass stood as if stunned and horrified at what had happened, while the king looked as if he had been expecting such an outcome. At that moment, he thought that his competitors had heard of his plans much sooner than he had realized. Long time no see, King, said the woman solemnly, standing against the empty doorway. It was the leader of the Shinshinkyo faction, Shin Shunhee, better known as God. With a smile, she said that according to her information, the general had recently reappeared. The man in a suit standing next to the woman shook off the dust and looked into Kiel Wu's eyes. That man was the director of the Special Bureau of Martial Arts Masters Administration, Huang Jaiho, known by the alias Emperor. He muttered that the agreement was for the king to share all the information he could about the general. Wu Ahan stood by the window, looking thoughtfully at the night city. She reflected on her father and how it was still, as if the old man didn't believe she was Wu Yum's daughter. Suddenly, the general entered the room, apologizing for the girl having to wait so long for him. Akan turned around and looked at the old man. To her surprise, Jang-gun was dressed in the master's new, clean clothes. As he pulled up the rope, he said that he understood that the situation was not patient, but he needed to be ready. And given the fact that they'll have to fight the king, they need to do the best they can. After examining the girl, the old man said that he still couldn't believe that haejin was in the same class as Chul Wu's son. The general thought that it couldn't be a mere coincidence. Gazing into Ahan's eyes, Jang-gun added that he was also sure that she was here for a reason as well. With a bow of her head, the girl replied that it was no accident that she was in the same class with Tessin. On the contrary, she had chosen to study with him. All this time she had been gathering information, carefully hiding her identity, and waiting for the opportunity to avenge her father. Looking into the general's eyes, Ahan asked, was this really the moment she had been waiting for, and would Jang-gun be able to defeat Chul Wu? In a dejected tone, the old man replied that the king had only gotten stronger over the years, unlike him. Moreover, they are heading to the enemy's lair, which also complicates things. Akan thought about the general's words, but suddenly the general asked the girl to stop worrying. Emitting a jade-colored energy, Jang-gun confidently said that there was no way he would lose to the king. Meanwhile, 3 leaders of South Korea's most influential factions gathered at the royal company's main headquarters at once. Wrapping a fan around herself, Shin Xianghee mouthed that it had been 10 years since the 3 of them had gotten together. And even despite the time, they were all still the same. Not counting you, you witch-like scum, the king muttered through gritted teeth. The god thanked her colleague for the compliment, while the emperor asked to leave the idle chatter. With a menacing look at Chul Wu, Huang Jaiho ordered the king to relay all available information about the general. An Kyung-soo tried to intervene in the conversation, saying that they had broken in for nothing since the royal company had no information about Jang-gun. But immediately, the third chief was interrupted by Seung-hee. Embracing her blade, she mouthed that grown men were talking now, and he would be better off standing off to the side somewhere. The frightened Ochki immediately bowed before God and was silent. The emperor continued to press Kiel Wu. Saying that it was useless to play dumb, he said that he too had some guesses. The king asked to elaborate on them. Huang Jaiho said that his organization knows that the general attacked one of the royal company's offices, and also knows that Chul Wu is holding a schoolboy who might be Jang-gun's student. That the information would reach the competitors so quickly, the king could not have predicted. The emperor looked at Chul Wu's slumped face and realized that he had underestimated the skills of the Special Martial Arts Master Management Bureau. Shanhee jokingly called Jaiho a real stalker. The emperor recalled that 18 years ago, after the war, Shinshinkyo and the royal company had entered into agreements with their bureaus. The treaty requires factions to share information with each other about surviving martial artists and general cooperation if any are found. The treaty especially applies to the general's persona. Park Jang-gun is a dangerous Class A figure. The emperor reminded that such people should be reported first immediately. Taking off his glasses, Jaiho said that this was the last chance for Chul Wu to share information. Otherwise, both side factions would violate the terms of the treaty and act in their own interests. In the next instant, the light wave emitted by Jaiho traveled across the room, raising dust into the air. If you refuse, I will dissolve your royal company, the emperor summarized, looking majestically at Kiel Wu. Devouring his rival with a glare, he asked what the latter would do in such a case. The king looked at the emperor with hatred and realized that either submission or war was at stake. Meanwhile, Jang-gun and Wu Han made their way to the royal company's headquarters. The girl muttered that if her guess was correct, haejin should be in the basement, in the torture room. The general noticed that after many years, the stench around the building was still the same. Thinking over the plan, he decided that he would get haejin out first. After that, he invited Ahan to come with him. But before he could think about it, there was an explosion on one of the upper floors of the headquarters. A bright flash lit up the sky, and Jangan realized that the king was not alone. Ahan shouted out that it was someone's very strong aura. The general guessed that it was the emperor. Remembering his face, the old man said that no one had such a ferocious aura. He probably smelled something wrong and came to the king's office to check. The girl asked, what if the emperor was not alone here? Jangan replied that God must be there too, since the three factions had made an agreement at one time. Realizing the uncompromising nature of the situation, Ahan thought that the moment of vengeance was most likely postponed. The girl pronounced that as sad as it sounded, but if things were as she thought, the best solution now would be to retreat. To herself, she thought to herself, the general would definitely not be able to fight three leaders at once at the same time. If they rushed in now, there was a good chance they'd be caught. Trying to dissuade the old man, Ahan added that they were unlikely to kill haejin because he had important information. So they should retreat and think over a plan of action. Jangan still stood looking at the target he was so close to. His hand shook with nerves and anger. But pulling himself together, he said the girl was right. Meanwhile, in the basement of the royal company's main office, all three leaders of the leading factions were walking. The emperor wondered if anyone was still using torture. The door ahead looked the most ordinary. Walking up to it, the king knocked hard several times. A disgruntled Zhang Inhuan looked out of the door and asked if anything serious had happened, for he was busy. But looking over the king's shoulder, he marveled at the unexpected guests. The emperor recognized the same cruel Zhang Inhuan. God laughed and called the first chief a good boy. Walking through the door, the king asked Inquan if he had gotten anything out of the boy. The brutal replied that so far the boy had said nothing. Haejin was so exhausted that he just kneeled with his head down and paid no attention to the visitors. The first chief said that the boy was pretty stubborn, but if he waited a couple of days, he might be able to do something. Shanhe didn't like that because she'd be busy later. Walking into the cell, God asked the emperor if she minded if she spoke to the prisoner. Following behind Shanghe, Jaiho let her try to get the schoolboy to talk. As she approached Haejin, the girl marveled at how cruel Inwan had been to the boy. After these words, the boy opened his eyes. Haejin asked the unknown lady to leave as he didn't know anything. Shanghe looked at the schoolboy's face and noted that he was about the same age as her daughter, but had been through a lot. Taking the guy's face, she told him to bear with him for a while, and then she would make him feel more comfortable. Suddenly, Haejin felt an incredibly strong pressure on himself that made him feel unbearably creepy. God asked where the general was. The boy felt himself falling under hypnosis. Standing behind them, the king, emperor, and Inhuan awaited the result of this attempt. Through the pain and exertion, Haejin thought he couldn't say it, but his mouth moved on its own. At one point, the guy looked at Xianghe completely calmly and wanted to say something. "The general is here!" There was a sudden shout behind the backs of the visitors. Park Janggong was standing right behind them with a staff. The old man was breathing heavily and glaring angrily at the sworn enemies gathered in the same room. The stunned faction leaders looked around in fear, not expecting this turn of events. "Honestly, I didn't expect you to attack first. Did you think the king was here alone?" the emperor asked calmly. The general calmly replied that he knew about everything, but sometimes there are times when a true martial artist has no right to retreat. With those words, he looked into the eyes of the exhausted Haejin. After a moment, Janggong slammed his staff against the ground, forming a jade stream of energy. The old man then got into a fighting stance, preparing to fight against the three strongest men in Korea. "You dare to touch my student! Are you ready to get what you deserve?" the general angrily muttered. On the roof of the building outside the royal company's main office sat Ahan. The girl tried to move, but she was unable to do so. Recent events came to mind. After she had suggested retreating, the general had agreed with her, and then her body was bounded by an incomprehensible energy that prevented her from moving. Lowering the girl's body to her knees, Jangan told her to sit here and wait. As he left, the general promised Ahan that once he had dealt with the leaders and brought Haejin back, he would release her immediately. The girl asked why he did it. Jangan replied that he was tired of watching the young die for the sake of the old. Plus, if you're a martial artist, you can't give up or back down. The general stood alone in front of Haejin, surrounded by enemies. Haejin looked at the teacher, but the same teacher had her dress blocked by Shanghe. Jangan told his disciple to hold on, and then he would release him soon. At this moment, the king prepared to use the first phase of the emperor's rosary weapon. Charging his right fist with chi energy, Chol Wu swooped at the general with lightning speed, intending to carry out an imperial combat strike. Jangan used the first phase of the battle staff to repel the blow. With the demonic fire ability, he repelled the king's first attack. For his age, the old man didn't have such bad reactions. Chul Wu was furious. How could this decrepit bum dare to break into his lair, even alone against three of his best fighters? Deflecting the blow with his staff, Jangan turned around and kicked the king with his foot, knocking him back a few meters. Chol Wu didn't lose his balance and landed, breaking with his legs and arms. Looking back at Haejin, the general said that before he could release the boy, he needed to straighten out these guys. Such feigned pompousness infuriated the king. He shouted to his bosses to run to save the employees. Inhuan was upset because he too wanted to fight against the legendary general. But the king slammed his fists down sharply and shouted that he himself should deal with this old man. After that, Chul Wu looked over his shoulder at Brutal and threatened him with retaliation if he dared to interfere. "Oh, how he talks," frustratedly teased the first chief. Grabbing Kyung-soo by the neck, Inhuan walked towards the exit, saying that even God himself couldn't stop the king here. On the way, the third chief called for the guards. The emperor was quietly watching the fight. God said that this Chul Wu had always been a bit strange. The general looked at the king and noticed that he was as smug as ever. Unwilling to admit it, Chul Wu filled his right hand with red energy. This was his way of preparing to use the third phase. Jumping high, the king found himself high above Jangan, preparing to strike with both hands. Falling on top of the general, he began to launch lightning attacks with both hands, using the ability Ferocious Tiger Dominance. Jangan fended off blow after blow with his staff, noting that the king had grown considerably stronger over time. "Is that the best you can do, Grandpa? I've practiced endlessly for this moment," shouted Chul Wu fiercely. Swinging around, he reminded himself that this was revenge for a defeat 18 years ago, and prepared to strike harder. The old man calmly pronounced that the king was indeed great, but not without minuses. Swinging his staff, the general dodged and prepared for a counterattack. Directing a strike with his stick towards the king, Jangan used his sliding strike ability. Curving in an uncharacteristic trajectory, the staff struck Chul Wu's block. From the force of this attack, the king flew back again. However, this time he didn't fall, and within a second he was near the general again, counterattacking him. Jangan praised the king, saying that not everyone can withstand a blow of such strength. After planning his next actions, the general told Chul Wu to be ready to take on his full power. In response to another blow from the staff, the king once again placed a block in front of his face. But suddenly, Jangan leaped with his staff past the bulky man and was at his back. Looking back, Chul Wu saw that the old man had actually withdrawn from the battle. Instead of other opponents, the general pounced on the chains restraining Haejin. Throwing the boy's arm over his shoulder, the master asked the boy if he could stand. In response, the boy asked why Jangan had come after him, if it was his own fault for being caught. In response, the old man muttered that it was the duty of every teacher to protect his student. The road to retreat, as expected, was blocked by the king. Trying to find something in his robe, the general shouted that they would talk next time, but for now they needed to get out of here. At the same instant, Jangong threw a smoke grenade towards Chul Wu. After the check came off, the space in front of the king was filled with acrid smoke. Through that smoke with the boy in his arms, the general sprinted past the enemy, surprised that even after 18 years, the technique worked. The exit from the torture chamber was only meters away. But suddenly from the right, the fleeing master was suddenly attacked. Shanhee blocked their way. The old man hit her with a fan and hit her back with his staff. The girl shouted that it was unfair to use modern things. Standing not far from the exit, he added that although she didn't interfere in the fight, she couldn't watch her nemesis flee either. The emperor also agreed. To King Jiho, who had emerged from the acrid smoke, he told him that even though they had let him fight one-on-one, they couldn't let him go now. The general stood near the door, with the three leaders standing across from him. Sweating a little, he realized that it wasn't as easy as he had originally expected. Jangan asked Haejin if he could run, to which the boy replied that he seemed to be able to. "Fine," the old man said, and the boy realized that now he was really going to have to go on his own. In the same second, the general threw the boy behind his back in one fell swoop, straight into the doorway. Running to the door and grabbing the handle, Jangan shouted for the kid to run while he held off the enemies. The boy tried to detain the teacher, asking him to come to his senses. But the general, with a smile on his face, immediately closed the door. Facing his opponents, Jangan said that now he had at least done what he had originally wanted to do, and now they can fight for real. The general began to untwist his staff. Standing up in a fighting stance, he angrily muttered that if the factions wanted his life so badly, then let them try to take it away themselves. Stabbing his hand on the closed door, the boy called desperately for the teacher. At some point, realizing it was useless, the guy gave up, tilted his head, and cried. It was then that Haejin realized that if he acted normally, keeping his head down and not attracting attention, the general would be alive. At this moment, a voice behind him marveled that the boy had managed to escape, and noted that this old man was quite strong. Recognizing the familiar voice, the boy turned around. "Now that's my good fortune," Inhwan, who was standing there, muttered. He had two swords in his hands, looking playfully at the victim. Brutal said that he had promised the general not to touch Hagen, but no one would mind if they just played around now. Slipping the sword into its scabbard, the first chief added that it would only yield if the schoolboy showed but what he was capable of. "I will fight with only one sword," Inhwan said, smiling, pointing his hand at the second blade. The pompous bastard made the boy incredibly hateful. Concentrating key energy around him, the guy said that he was about to kill the inhuman. Meanwhile, inside the torture room, the emperor assumed that the general was trying to buy time for his ward to escape. With a flash of his energy aura, he asked if Janggong really thought he could resist 3 masters at once. "That's what we're going to check now!" shouted the old man, preparing to attack. Releasing a lot of ki energy, the general rushed out of his seat with lightning speed. Waving his battle staff, he prepared to activate a Phase 2 attack. Suddenly, near the king, Janggong soared into the air, unwinding his weapon over his head. Such an unexpected attack from a man who liked to defend himself almost took Chol-woo by surprise. In the last instant, the king managed to block a blow from the blade's sharpness ability. Looking at his opponent, Chol-woo decided that it was as if he had become an order of magnitude stronger. Janggong's eyes became jade-colored from the excessive energy that came up. Abruptly changing the trajectory of the attack, the general stepped sideways and knocked his opponent to the ground with a powerful blow of his staff. King's face contorted in pain from the impact of his head hitting the ground. The emperor, who was standing in the distance, was still watching the battle calmly, which was not the case with God. She could tell that she was a little flustered by the king's unprecedented loss. Jaho mouthed that the general was using his innate power in the form of life energy to become stronger. To this, Janggong replied that since he was 1 against 3, it would be much more fair. With some irritation, the emperor asked his opponent if some schoolboy was so important to him. Looking furiously at the pompous type in the suit, the old man replied that the latter would never understand it, as they looked at people as a resource. Suddenly, the general said that this room was too crowded for the 4 of us to fight. The space around shook violently and was filled with a soft jade light. Janggong shouted that it was about time to change locations and launched a powerful energy hurricane. The royal company building shook, glass began to crumble, and rocks began to fly everywhere. Suddenly, there were several successive explosions along the chain from the lower to the upper floors, as if someone was moving quickly. Wu Eihan looked up at the tilted main headquarters of the royal company. She was angry at the old man for taking revenge on the faction leaders without her input. A third chief, Glasses, was also among the employees fleeing the building. The general had already made it to one of the upper floors, and the faction directors were still rushing after him, climbing the ruins of the headquarters. All 3 had had enough of Janggong's antics, and decided that this time they would end the old man once and for all. Clutching his staff, the general shouted that now they would fight for real. Meanwhile, in the basement, Inhwan admired the crumbling ceiling, anticipating the destruction the craftsman had wrought on the surface. Offering no distractions, Cruel looked at her opponent and noted that he was not at his best at all, so he would succumb even more. The first chief would let Haejin go if he managed to hit him even once. At the same time, Inhwan promised to continue fighting with only one hand. Without answering the Punisher's question, the boy immediately made the first lunge forward. As expected, the much fresher Inhwan dodged with ease, laughing at his victim. In response, he chopped at Haejin's hands with his sword, ironically asking if the man couldn't even channel energy properly, surprised at such an obvious weakness. The boy grabbed his arm. Cruel suggested he still try harder, asking if this was what the teacher was risking his life for now. Calling his opponent's name, the boy threw himself at him with another attack. However, inwardly, Haejin calmed himself in every way possible. Looking at the annoying opponent, the guy realized that this type of guy was strong, and he couldn't be defeated just like that. Once again, the schoolboy missed and was cut in return. This time, a rather deep blade wound appeared on his left cheek. However, despite the physical superiority of the first chief, Hagen's hand is played by the fact that his opponent knowingly considers him weak. The main thing that is necessary in the fight with such an opponent: competently put his vigilance to sleep with his excessive emotionality. And as soon as Inhwan thinks his superiority is limitless and reveals his weak points, that's exactly where to strike. Meanwhile, a veritable battle of the Titans was taking place between floors in the royal company's main headquarters. The king answered the general's relentless attacks with his own counterattacks. Soon, the old man struck again with a stun punch from above, and Chul Wu in turn blocked this lunge again. But with each new strike from Jangan, the king was finding it harder and harder to fight back. At the same moment, Shanghi ran past the fighting masters, running to the rear of the general. Once behind, the girl used her hypnosis ability, ordering the old man to stop. The general succumbed to God's action for a moment, and that was enough for Cholwu to retreat. Just then, Jangan realized that finally the leaders had decided to join forces against him. With a powerful throw, he threw Shanghi away from him, thus getting rid of her influence. The girl pressed her back into the wall and glared angrily at the old man. At this moment, concentrating the energy in his right hand from behind him, the emperor suddenly approached the general from behind. Jangan realized rather late that he was being attacked from behind. However, the general had time to turn around and block Jiho's blow with his staff. Not trying to play tug-of-war classically, the old man instantly launched a counterattack after blocking the blow. Unfolding his staff, Jangan launched a swift attack into the side of his opponent. Emperor was forced to block the punch and step out of the clinch for a moment. The sleeve of his jacket appeared a little torn, almost to the elbow. The old man stared at his opponent in exasperation, trying to think of what he should do next. Fending off the endless attacks was already unbearably difficult. Chunks of reinforced concrete began to crumble from the upper floors onto the mini arena formed below. Then an idea occurred to the general, perhaps the last of the ideas that would help him defeat his opponents. Abruptly stepping out of the battle with the emperor, Jangan jumped up and flew several floors high. Jaiho saw the old man get into a fighting stance on one of the higher ground off to the side. Sweat was pouring from the general's face. It was fatal to continue fighting at such a frantic pace. All three of them were as strong as beasts, but Huang Jaiho stood out even among them. Even using his innate strength, Zhang Guang didn't leave a scratch on him. Looking at the city around him, the old man sighed heavily. His innate strength was slowly coming to an end. His arms were starting to go numb, his legs if he could hold his body up. If he continued to absorb this energy, he was finished. The faction leaders eyed the general sitting on the wreckage and tried to anticipate what he would do next. The emperor realized that their enemy had almost no strength left, and in any battle of attrition, the old man would definitely lose. Realizing that a desperate move was coming, Jaho warned his companions that something out of the ordinary might happen now. As soon as he said that, a dark jade light instantly enveloped the space around Jangan. The general waved his staff, creating a hurricane, and seemed to be preparing something special. This is the only way I have a chance to win, the old man thought, building up the energy around him. After a few moments, he used the slashing technique. No one present had ever experienced this ability before. All three masters were instantly enveloped by that powerful energy aura of the general. Then the old man swung his staff once more. His eyes blazed with both rage and a last hope. Immediately after dissection, Jangan activated the iron armor ability. A few seconds later, a monumental pillar of energy rose into the sky, turning into a hurricane that devoured everything around it. The strength of this typhoon was so great that in a moment, it made a hole in the building from the inside and rushed out. The powerful jolt was like the aftermath of an earthquake, and Inhuan lost his balance for a moment. Haejin, who was still on his feet, noticed this. In that second, he realized that he might never have a better moment. Spreading out, the schoolboy went into the flank of the blundering Cruel. After a moment, the first chief realized that he had lost sight of the little rascal, who still had no intention of dying. At a dangerous distance, Inhuan tried to avoid the blow by turning his body away from the trajectory of the attack. But at that point, it was too late. There was a huge hole gaping in the Royal Company building, from the first to almost the last floors. Debris of concrete and iron, flying several dozen meters, collapsed into the well formed in the center of the structure. A gray-haired man sat on one of the large debris, trying to catch his breath. With his last strength, he tried to rise from his knees to his feet. At that moment, the general realized that he had seriously underestimated himself. But suddenly, a voice came from behind the old man. A voice praised Jangan, saying that with the use of life energy itself, his power exceeded all expectations. Behind the general stood the king, god, and emperor. All three of them were bloody, wearing tattered clothes. Jaiho said that even two of them would be too much for Jangan to handle. Standing with a bloody hand, Chalwu cursed the old man for what he had done to him and his staff. Looking at the general with haggard, embittered eyes, Sayanhi wailed that her favorite dress was torn because of him. Jangan was still desperately trying to get to his feet, but he was failing. Even with the aid of a staff, I couldn't get up. Looking at the exhausted, weakened opponent, the Emperor summarized that the old man's strength was running out. Walking up to the general and extending a hand charged with key energy towards him, Jaiho said it was time to call it a day. Some time ago, in the basement of the same building, another battle was similarly coming to an end. Throwing his arm forward, Haejin landed a powerful punch to Inhwan's jaw and threw him to the other end of the hallway. In flight, Cruel's eyes seemed to stop giving signs of life. A second later, the first chief's body collapsed to the floor with a clatter, and Haejin fell down beside him without strength. Relieved that he had finally made it, the boy heard a cry of pain in front of him. Looking up, he saw that not only was the torturer not dead, but he had not even lost consciousness and was now sitting across from him, holding his head with his hand. Trying to stop the blood flowing from his eye, Inhwan asked with a smile, wondering if the kid had been waiting for the moment to strike all this time. And he hit him with all his might. Looking at the schoolboy trying to get to his feet, Cruel continued to laugh, saying that if Hagen would have hit even a little harder, and then he would have definitely killed him. The boy's hands shook from lack of strength. There was no physical strength left to continue the fight. But raising his arms in a fighting stance, the kid mouthed that he still had willpower left. "Let's see who's who!" shouted Haejin, glaring fiercely at the enemy. But then Inhwan asked why they should continue the fight, which caused a stupor in the schoolboy. Cruel reminded the boy that he had promised to let him go if Hagen hit him even once. Getting up from the ground, the first chief asked the boy if he really wanted to fight to the end. "It wouldn't take long to die. I can't vouch for the rest, but I'm responsible for my words," Inhwan muttered with a smile. Laughing, he added that in addition, Haejin also liked him a lot. Picking up the swords from the floor, Cruel told the boy to get the hell out of here and they'd have a lot of fun next time. Pointing his finger in the direction of one of the corridors, the chief added that there were old men fighting there, and through that exit the guy could leave the building. As soon as Inhwan said that, the wall behind him instantly became covered with dozens of large cracks. In the next second, hundreds of large and small fragments of concrete rained down on the guys. When he looked at the hole formed in the place of the door, Cruel got upset and said that it had happened at the wrong time. A picture of the battle between the general and the rest of the masters came into view. The old man's back was all torn up, with blood flowing profusely in many places. Haejin stared at the teacher in horror, amazed at the state this once strong and healthy man was in. With a shout, the boy rushed toward Jongun, who noticed the boy out of the corner of his eye. But Inhwan immediately grabbed the schoolboy's neck, telling him to calm down, because his teacher was dead anyway. If the boy ran over there, he would risk getting killed himself. Cruel offered to stay in a safe place and observe what was going on. The emperor appeared on the dais. Turning to the general, he said that he had surprised him greatly. "You have exceeded all my expectations. Even after absorbing so much life energy, you still have the strength to fight back," Jaiho said admiringly. The king, who was standing behind him, shouted that now the old man was definitely finished. God, revealing the fan, noted that it had now become too weak to fight back. "Let's finish him off with this blow." Raising his hand, the emperor said solemnly. Holding his hand to his punctured stomach, the general groaned, trying to gather strength for a last defense. Raising his staff with one hand, the other covering his wound, Jangan hoped that at least one of his enemies would take at least one of them with him to the other world. Their forces were originally not equal, but now the superiority was painfully colossal. All three of them broke from their seats at once and attacked the general. In response to the faction leader's blows, Jangan tried one last time to put up a block with his staff. The final moments of this legendary battle were coming to an end. But suddenly, the emperor abruptly changed the direction of the attack. He dashed past the injured old man without hitting him, given the chance. Jangan instantly assessed the situation and realized where Jaiho was headed. The emperor was rapidly approaching Inhwan, who was holding Haejin by the neck. Applying the dragon strike, he was ready to kill the boy with one blow. But in the next instant, at the place where Haejin and the emperor were, a huge jade pillar of energy burst into the sky. The schoolboy's face was splattered with scarlet blood. He was staring horrified, staring straight ahead. Opposite him stood the general. From behind, the emperor's hand slammed into his back. The blow was so strong that it pierced his spine. The master's body weakened. Haejin still couldn't believe what had happened. The emperor, without changing his expression, muttered that he had originally counted on the old man running here to save the boy. And as it turned out, he was right. The general lowered his eyes and spat the blood that came to his mouth. His mouth was practically unable to move. Was this really the end? His eyes were slowly beginning to darken. It looked like he hadn't had the best life. Suddenly, Haejin called out to the old man. Jangun slowly looked up. He looked into his student's fear-filled eyes. He had already seen such horrors at such a young age. Still, there was something he wanted to do towards the end. Reaching out 2 fingers, he touched the boy's chest, and some jade energy flowed into his body. "Haejin, live!" the mentor spoke softly. Tears came to the boy's eyes. What was he to do next? Where to go? Who would he turn to? At that second, the emperor threw the general's body behind his back. Throwing him with all his might into the wall, Jiho continued to stand nonchalantly with his bloody right hand. "The general's assassination is complete," he solemnly stated. The boy looked at the teacher's body in horror. He was overwhelmed with emotion. A nervous breakdown was approaching. Unable to stand it, Haejin screamed, trying to get out of Inhuan's arms. As he passed by the boy, the emperor said that the student should be killed as well. At that second, he squeezed the student's organs with his energy. The impact was so strong that blood came out of the guy's mouth at the same second. A moment later, Haejin's body fell breathlessly to the ground. As he left, the emperor added that today's catch had been quite good. Pausing for a moment, he ordered everyone to clean the place up. After that, Jiho leisurely headed towards the exit of the room. Standing in the center of the resulting ruins, the king looked around at the destruction and had no idea how much money it would take to rebuild the building. Standing up from the concrete block and curling up her fan, Shanhee swept it up. It wasn't as interesting towards the end anymore. Saying that she would go too, the girl left. Meanwhile, Inhuan looked sadly at Haejin's corpse. Kicking the boy's body, he thought that this schoolboy was quite capable. Too bad he'd chosen the losing side. "Well, it can't be helped," the first chief said with a change of mood. After calling the royal company's services on the phone, he summoned people to dispose of the corpses. That night, outside of town in the woods on one of the hills, work was in full swing. A sanitation team of several men was digging one large grave somewhere in a thicket of trees. Looking at the body bag, one of the diggers asked his partner if the famous general had died so trivially. He went from boss to emperor, and what in the end? As they talked over each other, one of the orderlies asked who the type in the second bag was. The familiar explained to him that this boy was a pupil of the general, who had come running to rescue this schoolboy and died. Grinning, one of the gravediggers said that that kid was too young and just picked the wrong teacher. Meanwhile, Haejin's stomach began to glow as he lay in the bag. An aura of jade energy appeared where Janggun had touched him before he died. Suddenly, the energy cloud made a ki surge outwards, and in the area around the location of the heart, jade energy streams appeared one after another. After a moment, the kid suddenly let out a sound like a sigh or a low wheeze. The diggers noticed a sudden movement in the body bag, much to their surprise. Approaching the body with a shovel at the ready, one of the gravediggers irritatedly said that the emperor, as usual, couldn't finish anything properly. "All he knows how to do is cause trouble!" the orderly shouted in rage, bringing his shovel to finish off the waking boy. But then a blade suddenly flew out of the forest thicket towards the gravediggers. As it flew close to the digger, the dagger split the shovel in two, startling the attendant. The knife stabbed into a tree nearby and drew the attention of the entire group. An unknown girl suddenly came out from behind a tree. Holding a blade in her hand, she asked the ringleader who she was and asked if the young man in the sack was still alive. Grabbing a black sword from behind her back, the girl mouthed that she wouldn't let that boy die at the hands of those diggers. With a glance at Haejin, she said she would take him with her. Glaring angrily at her opponents, the stranger decided there was no turning back for her. The workers grabbed their shovels from the ground at the sight of the approaching sword-wielding girl. One of them shouted in panic that someone had ratted them out. The squad leader ordered his subordinates to come to their senses. After all, it was just a woman in front of them. The next second, he ordered the big men with shovels to finish the stranger off and bury her with those corpses. Looking at the villains with hatred, the girl decided it was even better this way. That way, no one would remember her face. A few moments later, Ahan ran alongside each of the orderlies at lightning speed, slashing them with her sword in the process. Stopping behind the backs of the big men, the girl thought it was easier than she had imagined. Just then, the bodies of the diggers fell one after another. This scene horrified the squad leader. Sheathing his blade, he pointed it at the stranger, panicking as he asked who she was. At the same time, Wuahan walked up to her opponent and concentrated ki energy in her left hand. With a run, the girl struck the gravedigger in the jaw with her fist. The group leader recoiled from his attacker, spitting blood through his teeth. In the next instant, Ahan had her sword in both hands, preparing to end the short bout. Lightning fast, using the 4 seconds pure stream technique, she activated the water stream ability and chopped the rogue. A moment later, the gravedigger collapsed on his back with no sign of life, and Ahan ran toward where the body bags lay. Running to the spot, she began unzipping the bag, praying that haejin was alive. In the bag, the girl saw a terrible picture. Her classmate was lying on his back. All his clothes were bloody. His face and hands were bruised. In the center of his chest, an unknown aura of greenish color was swirling. Overwhelmed by what she saw, Ahan stated that he was very seriously injured, but still alive. Taking a closer look at the jade energy, the girl assumed that the guy had stayed alive thanks to this aura. Piling on Hagen's uneasy body, she decided she would figure it all out later. But for now, it was time for them to get out of here. Looking at the general's body bag, Ahan thought she should get him out of here sometime too. But at that moment, a radio conversation was heard behind me. The surviving squad leader was relaying information to the main office. Lying in a pool of his own blood, the group leader reported that they were under attack and needed reinforcements. They radioed that help was on the way. Akan walked toward the gravedigger. At the last moment, he cheekily asked the stranger if she knew who she was messing with. A second later, the girl kicked the leader of the squad in the face, smashing his head. The creepy guy dropped dead without any signs of life, dropping the phone. Akan crushed the device as well. Angry that there was definitely no way to retrieve Jangun's body now, the girl hurried to flee the scene as quickly as possible. Before leaving, she took one last look around and looked at the remaining bag. Mentally saying goodbye and apologizing to the general, Ahan hurried to safety. Hagen was tormented by a very strange and frightening dream. He dreamed that some bastards were tormenting Park Jangun with impunity, slashing his back into blood. He then had a vision of an emperor who personally wanted to kill him. Finally, the boy saw the breathless body of his teacher, whereupon he screamed at the top of his voice. In a cold sweat, the guy woke up, trying to step back from what he had seen. With his only healthy eye wide open, Haejin fell into a stupor. Shouldn't he be dead right now? Wondering where he was now, the boy saw a girl approaching, noticing his awakening. The boy was very surprised to see Wu Weihan's classmate in front of him. The girl said with a serious face that she was already waiting for him to wake up. Pulling the blanket off of himself and trying to get up, Haejin impatiently asked where the mentor was and what had happened to him. At that moment, the boy was taken by Ahan's hand. Seeing the growing panic in the young man's eyes, the girl said she realized he was confused. Looking sternly at her classmate, Ahan told him to calm down, and then she would explain everything to him. In that instant, Haejin had already realized that everything he had just dreamed was not a terrifying dream, but a bitter memory. In the next few minutes, the girl told how all the events looked from her side. From her words, when the general touched the boy, everything was already over. With a dejected look, Ahan said she was able to follow them to retrieve the bodies. But she was only able to save Haejin. And in the end, I couldn't do anything but watch again, sadly said the girl. She also added that when she first saved her classmate, there was still a trace of the general's energy burning in his chest. From her words, Jangun used the last remnant of his life energy to save Haejin. After saying that, the guy sadly touched his chest. Summarizing, Ahan said that now the guy just has to appreciate his life. Leaning over the bed, the girl suggested that her classmate just forget everything that had happened and run far away from here. Turning around, she advised Haejin to leave martial arts behind and start a normal, quiet life. If he needed help with his new identity, Ahan was willing to help with that. Thanking his girlfriend for her help, the guy said he wouldn't need any help on the run. Ahan looked unhappily at Haejin, who was once again willing to risk his life. Alternatively, the boy said that if the girl wanted to avenge her father, he was willing to help her do so. Furious, the girl asked the kid if he had listened to her at all. The classmate replied that the teacher was the only adult who cared about him. Haejin remembered how he had helped this old man, though he could have just walked by and not paid attention. And it was Park Jangun who opened the boy's meridians and taught him martial arts, thanks to which he was able to stand up for himself for the first time. And at the end, he also gave the rest of his life away. Smiling, the boy told Ahan that she knew he wouldn't hesitate long, and now he simply has no other choice. There's no other way to do it. At the end, Haejin added that he didn't care if his classmate agreed, because otherwise he would avenge Jangun alone. Bleeding sweat, the girl said that the guy himself should have seen how strong the top three were. Did he really think he could even scratch any of them? Getting out of bed, Haejin confirmed that he was no match for them right now. But there's always an easier way, isn't there? The boy muttered with a smirk. Recovering, the boy came to the basement where his teacher had trained him. Sadly walking through the familiar corridors, Haejin looked up and saw a familiar thing. On the rack hung the general's green coat. Taking off his jacket and walking over to the wall, the boy thought that what he was looking for must be in here somewhere. Seeing a barely visible notch in the wall, the guy pressed it. To his surprise, the button yielded and squeaked into the wall. Immediately, a passage to a lighted room opened before his eyes. It was a rather small room, with drawers near the walls, filled with various useful things. The whole place glistened as if even the general had never been here before. Haejin's attention was immediately drawn to the order. Everything was arranged on separate shelves, in separate drawers. Immediately, his gaze fell on a stand with various traditional Oriental weapons. Throwing knives, katanas, sabers. It seemed that one could choose a cold weapon for every taste. After standing at the entrance for a bit, the boy finally ventured into the room. Just then, he hung the general's coat on a nail nailed to the wall. Throwing off his hoodie, Haejin decided to test how steady he could perceive energy management. After gaining strength, he accumulated all the ki in his body and abruptly spat it out. The sweatshirt on the floor immediately flew into the corner of the room. Confidently looking forward, Haejin muttered that very soon he would become much stronger than those underdogs.
Pet the cat.